A week before the wedding, my fiancé's wealthy parents threw a prenup at me, calling it a small formality to protect the family assets. They didn't know I once sold an AI company for over $100 million, had my own lawyers, and was a silent shareholder in their own corporation. They thought they were asking if I was worthy of their family, but in just a few weeks, their whole empire would be shattered by that very question. My name is Elena Ryan, and I was almost 30 years old. For nearly all of those 30 years, I had been an expert in loneliness, a scholar of self-sufficiency. I had built a life, and then a company, and then a fortune. From the sharp, empty space where a family was supposed to be, I thought I had made peace with it. And then I met Oliver. Oliver, with his kind eyes and his easy, gentle laugh, who seemed as unmoored as I was. Despite the gravitational pull of his family name, he was the one who made me believe that family was not a thing you were born into, but a thing you could build, a safe harbor you could choose. That belief was why I was sitting in Oliver's car, climbing the winding, private road to the Montclair estate in Lakehurst Ridge. It was a place that didn't just whisper money, it shouted it from granite gates and acres of sculpted, unnervingly perfect forest. This dinner, just a week before our wedding, was meant to be the final welcome, the moment I officially became one of them. I was nervous, but it was the hopeful nervousness of a person about to receive a gift they never thought they'd be given. I genuinely believed I was about to have a real family, for the first time in my life. The house wasn't a home, it was a statement of dominance over the landscape. We walked into a foyer of echoing marble, where our footsteps sounded intrusive and small. A uniformed housekeeper, whose face was a polite, blank mask, took my coat. She did not meet my eyes. Oliver, who had been quiet and tense during the entire drive, squeezed my hand. His palm was damp. "Mom and Dad are waiting in the dining room," he said, and his voice was thinner than usual. He led me through an archway into a room that felt more like a modern art museum's atrium than a place where people ate. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, revealing the entire Seattle skyline glittering like scattered diamonds below a darkening sky. The sunset, in its final moments, cast a sickly golden light across the room, making everything look sanctified and holy. But the air was cold. It was a deep, penetrating chill that radiated from the massive marble slab of a dining table and the polished stone floors. It smelled like expensive, sterile emptiness. And at the far end of the table, they sat, Gregory and Elaine Montclair. They didn't rise. Gregory, with a head of perfect silver hair and a suit that probably cost more than my first car, nodded, a sharp, appraising gesture. Elaine, preserved in expensive silks and diamonds, offered a smile that did not touch her eyes. It was the smile of a surgeon, precise and devoid of warmth. They sat opposite each other, not as parents, but as a 2-person tribunal. They were here to review, not to welcome. "Elena, you're here," Gregory stated. It was not a greeting. "Thank you for having us," I said, my voice sounding too warm, too human for the space. Oliver pulled out my chair, a heavy, modern piece that scraped loudly against the floor. He sat beside me, and his hand immediately found mine on the table. It was a gesture I usually loved, but tonight I could feel the tension in his fingers. He was gripping my hand, but his eyes, his entire focus, was glued to his parents. He was a man held captive, present only as a satellite to their will, a good, kind man, being slowly and completely swallowed by the family he was born into. The first course was served in silence. It was some kind of elaborate seafood tower that looked like a sculpture. The clinking of our silverware against the porcelain plates was the only sound, sharp and loud in the heavy air. I took a bite. The food was exquisite and completely tasteless. I watched Elaine lift a single, perfect scallop to her lips, her eyes fixed on me over the rim of her wineglass. "The preparations are all finalized." "Of course," Elaine said, her voice a smooth, cultured glide. "Tessa Rowe has confirmed the floral arrangements. We decided the white orchids were a more appropriate choice than the lilies you mentioned. Oh, I said, blindsided. We had discussed lilies. The orchids sound lovely. Oliver's grip on my hand tightened. A silent plea. Don't make a scene. Good, Gregory grunted, cutting into his food with brutal efficiency. This wedding is a significant event for Montclair Holdings. We have partners flying in from 3 different continents. The optics must be perfect. My stomach tightened. Optics. Not joy, not love. Optics. We ate. The silence stretched again, thick with things unsaid. I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in the cold air and the weight of their judgment. Finally, after the plates were cleared, Elaine dabbed her lips with a linen napkin. She looked at Gregory. A small, almost imperceptible nod. He nodded back. It was time. Gregory reached down to a leather briefcase by his chair, a briefcase, at his own dinner table, and retrieved a folder. It was thick, bound in dark blue leather, with a single tasteful line of gold embossing around the edge. He slid it across the vast expanse of marble. It glided silently, like a predator, until it stopped directly in front of my plate. A single definitive thud. The sound echoed, a final, gavel-like punctuation mark that broke the strained peace. I looked at the folder, then at Oliver. He was staring at his plate, his face pale, his jaw clenched. He knew. He had known this was coming. "What is this?" I asked, my voice steady. "Just a small formality, dear," Elaine said. Her voice was soft now, almost motherly, which was infinitely more terrifying. "A simple document to protect the family assets. You understand? I'm sure. It's just what families like ours do." Families like ours. The words hung in the air, a clear, sharp dividing line. There was their family, and then there was me. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to be still. I opened the folder. It was not a simple document. It was nearly an inch thick. The title at the top, in a severe, bold font, was Prenuptial Agreement. I am not a lawyer, but I am not a fool. I built a company from nothing, and I read every contract I ever signed. I started to read, my eyes scanning the dense, numbered paragraphs. My blood did not run cold. It evaporated. It was a systematic erasure of my existence, a declaration that my presence in this family, in this marriage, would be financial zero. I was to waive any and all claims to any property, any assets, any income, any appreciation of assets, held by the Montclair name, or Oliver Montclair, or any trust or entity associated with them, now or in the future, in perpetuity, throughout the universe. I was asked to acknowledge that I would receive no spousal support, regardless of the circumstances of a potential separation. It stipulated that I would vacate any family property within 24 hours. It was brutal. It was comprehensive, but that wasn't the worst part. I kept reading, and then I found it. The truly insidious part. It was a small, subtle subclause tucked into a section about mutual endeavors. It stipulated that if I, Elena Ryan, were to contribute to or participate in any project, venture, or company bearing the Montclair name, any and all intellectual property, income, or value I generated would be reevaluated and automatically deemed a contribution to the family trust. They wouldn't just own my future. They were laying a legal framework to own my work. They were turning my mind, my effort, my entire being into just another asset for them to manage. I finally looked up from the pages. The room was silent. Gregory was sipping his wine, watching me with detached curiosity, like a scientist observing a lab rat. I turned my head to the man beside me, the man who had held me and told me he loved me more than anything, the man who had promised to be my partner, my team, my family. Oliver? He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the table, his knuckles white as he gripped his water glass. And then he leaned in, his voice a low, desperate whisper that was meant for me alone, but which felt like a public execution. "Elena, please, don't make a scene. Just sign it. We can talk about it later. They're just, they're just worried about the future. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't the cold, calculated cruelty of his parents that broke my heart. It was the soft, yielding, spineless terror of my fiancé. In that single whisper, I saw my entire future, a future of me fighting and him pleading for peace, a future of me being slowly sanded down, diminished, and him looking away, telling me not to make a scene. The pain was sharp, a sudden, blinding clarity. I had been so wrong. I wasn't here to be welcomed into a family. I was at an audition, and I had just been handed the script for a part I could never play. The beautiful, silent, powerless wife. My hands, which had been trembling, were suddenly perfectly still. I slowly, calmly, closed the leather-bound folder. The cover made a soft, final whoosh as it settled. I placed both my hands flat on the table. I looked at Gregory. I looked at Elaine, whose smile was just beginning to flicker with impatience, a small smirk playing on her lips. Then I looked at Oliver. He finally met my gaze, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading hope that I would just be quiet, that I would just do as I was told. "I need time to think," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the cold air of that room with absolute finality. I pushed my chair back. The sound of it scraping against the marble was deafening. I stood up. Gregory's eyes narrowed. Elaine's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine, startled annoyance. Oliver's face crumpled. "Elena, wait," he breathed. But I was already walking. I walked out of the dining room. I walked through the cavernous marble foyer. My heels clicked, a steady, rhythmic beat of retreat. I did not run. I reached the massive front door and pulled it open. The cold, damp Seattle air hit my face, and it felt like the first real breath I had taken all night. A light, cold rain had just begun to fall, misting the air and making the gravel of the long driveway shine. I didn't tell them. I didn't tell them that my time to think would be spent with my own lawyer, a woman who had negotiated the sale of an AI logistics company for over $100 million. I didn't tell them that I was already a silent and significant holder of their own corporation's bonds. I didn't tell them who I was. I just stepped out into the rain, leaving the warmth and the light and the man I thought I loved behind in that cold, glass box. I walked away with one singular, crushing realization. A love without courage isn't love. It's a cage, and it can't protect anyone, least of all itself. The rain was cold, but the walk from the Montclair gates to where I'd left my car was long, and by the time I was inside my own vehicle, the chill in my bones had nothing to do with the weather. It was the icy realization of my own stupidity. I had allowed myself to believe in a fantasy, a warm, welcoming family, when my entire life had taught me that the only person I could ever truly rely on was myself. I drove back to my apartment in Seattle. It was a small, cozy one-bedroom place that looked out over the Sound. It was warm, filled with books, and unassuming. It was a place where Elena Ryan, the fiancé, lived. It was not a place that gave any hint of the other Elena, the one who had built and sold a company for a fortune. I sat on my sofa, still in my damp dinner dress, and stared at the rain lashing against the glass. The reflection that stared back was a ghost of someone else, a woman who had sat trembling at that marble table. "I did all of this without them," I whispered to the empty room. "I built everything from nothing. Why was I sitting there, shaking?" My mind drifted back, away from the cold marble and the scent of sterile wealth, to a different time, a time that smelled of stale coffee, instant noodles, and the buzz of old fluorescent lights. 6 years ago, I wasn't Elena Ryan, fiancé to a Montclair. I was just Elena, the girl working 12 to 14 hours a day from a shared hot desk in a co-working space in Tacoma. I slept on a cot in a storage closet I rented. I showered at the 24-hour gym down the street, and my diet consisted almost entirely of ramen packets and free stale bagels from the co-working kitchen. I was running on nothing but caffeine and a singular obsessive dream, an AI-driven logistics platform. I called it Nova Route Labs. The idea hadn't been born in a boardroom or a venture capital pitch meeting. It had been born in the quiet, dusty stacks of the Tacoma Public Library, sketched out in a tattered, spiral-bound notebook. It was an algorithm to help small businesses, the florists, the local bakers, the independent bookstores, optimize their delivery routes, to give them a fighting chance against the shipping giants that were crushing them. I had no family to give me a seed loan, no powerful connections to open doors. I just had the algorithm in my head and a desperate, burning need to prove it could work. I started taking it to investors. I put on my one good blazer, bought at a thrift store, and walked into sleek offices in downtown Seattle. The rejections were fast and brutal. The AI logistics space is dominated by giants. Sweetheart, one told me, leaning back in his chair, not even looking at my presentation. You're, what, 24? Another asked, flipping through my pitch deck like it was a comic book. This is a very complex field. One investor, a woman I had hoped would be an ally, looked at me with bored pity. It's a cute idea, Elena, she'd said. But who's backing you? Who's on your board? You need someone with a real name attached. As if my own name wasn't enough. Each no was a sting, but I wasn't the kind of person who broke. I was the kind who hardened. I went back to the co-working space, took on more freelance coding gigs, and poured every dollar I earned, every hour I was awake, into refining the algorithm. I would code until 3 a.m, sleep for 4 hours, and be back at it. Every time I remembered their dismissive faces, the casual way they'd looked through me, I typed faster. The breakthrough came not from a flashy VC firm, but from a small, local investment fund in Tacoma. The founder was a woman who had built her own trucking company from a single flatbed. She didn't care about my blazer or my connections. She cared about the math. Your route optimization, she said, squinting at my code. This could save my drivers 20% on fuel. 20%. She didn't give me millions. She gave me a pilot program with her own fleet. For 6 months, I practically lived in her dispatch office. I rode in the trucks. I interviewed the drivers. I tweaked the code in real time, and it worked. It didn't just work. It revolutionized her business. After that, we didn't need to chase investors. They started chasing us. We got a few more contracts. The company became cash flow positive. Within 2 years, Nova Route Labs was a quiet but powerful force in Pacific Northwest logistics. Then came the offer, a massive global tech transport conglomerate, the kind of giant I'd been warned about. They didn't want to compete with my algorithm. They wanted to own it. The negotiation was a 6-month war, fought in sterile conference rooms by lawyers in $1,000 suits. But they didn't know I had Mara. Mara Quinn, my best friend. We'd met in college, and she was the only person on earth who had seen me at my most broken. Now, she was a razor-sharp corporate lawyer who fought for me with a terrifying loyalty. When the dust settled, the deal was done. Nova Route Labs was sold for just under $100 million. The price of that sale, however, was anonymity. The conglomerate was paranoid about competitors. The deal was contingent on ironclad, multi-layered NDAs. I was to be erased from the company's public history. My name was not to be mentioned in any press release, any tech blog, any 30 under 30 list. I was to become a ghost. Most people would have hated that. They would have bought a penthouse in Seattle, a supercar, a closet full of designer clothes to prove it had all been real. I did the opposite. I took the money and, with Mara's help, moved it. Most of it went into a diversified trust, established under a complex legal entity that didn't bear my name. I paid off the small mortgage on my grandmother's house in Idaho. I set up anonymous scholarships at the community college I'd almost dropped out of. I lived on the interest, which was more than enough. But I never touched the principal. I didn't buy the penthouse. I didn't buy the supercar. I kept my old Honda and my small, cozy apartment. The anonymity they had forced on me turned out to be the greatest gift they could have given. It gave me freedom. I didn't stop working. I couldn't. The money wasn't the point. The building was. I founded a new company, Lumengrid Logistics, with a partner I trusted to be the public face. I was the silent co-founder, the voice on the strategy calls, the algorithm whisperer working from the background. I chose quiet control over the exhausting, hollow performance of public glory. Mara was the only person in the world who knew the full picture. She knew the exact structure of my trusts, the name of every shell corporation, the full, unredacted sum of my net worth. And that was the woman who had slept in a storage closet, who had been laughed out of boardrooms, who had built a $100 million company in secret. That was the woman who had sat at the Montclair's table tonight, trembling, while they slid a piece of paper across the table as if I was the one with nothing. The thought sent a jolt of anger through me, so sharp it burned away the last of the cold shock. I stood up from the sofa and walked to my laptop. I opened it. The screen illuminated my face in the dark room. I logged into my secure investment portal, the one Mara managed for me. The dashboard glowed to life, a simple, clean interface showing the various holdings of my trust, stocks, bonds, real estate funds. And there, near the bottom, was a line item I'd purchased 6 months ago, when their corporate bonds had dipped, a quiet, significant, multi-million-dollar holding of Montclair Holdings corporate debt. They had no idea that the nameless, penniless girl they were trying to intimidate was, in a small but very real way, one of their creditors. They thought they were playing chess with a pawn. They didn't know they had just tried to checkmate a queen, and that she was already on their side of the board. The laptop screen glowed in my dark apartment, the dashboard of my holdings a silent testament to a life the Montclairs knew nothing about. But that dashboard couldn't explain how I, a woman who had fought armies of investors and built an empire from scratch, had ended up weeping in a damp dress after being handed a contract. The answer wasn't on the screen. It was in Chicago, 2 years ago. I met Oliver Montclair at an AI summit. I was there as Elena Ryan, founder of Lumengrid, though I was intentionally keeping a low profile. I was speaking on a panel, the most boring one on the schedule. Ethics in AI-driven logistics, beyond the bottom line. It was a topic I was passionate about, the idea that algorithms, like people, needed a conscience. After the Q&A, as the room was clearing, he approached me. He looked different from the other attendees, who were all sharp suits and aggressive networking. He was wearing a simple blazer, his tie was slightly loosened, and he looked more like a curious academic than a finance guy. "That was brilliant," he said, his voice earnest. "What you said about human bias being coded into predictive models, most people here just want to know how to make the supply chain faster, not better." We ended up in the hotel lobby bar, drinking overpriced coffee. He confessed he was supposed to be at a formal dinner at a steakhouse. "My parents," he'd said with a self-deprecating laugh, "are always trying to merge my social life with their portfolio. I was supposed to be charming the daughter of some international shipping partner." He'd seen the title of my panel, Ethics, and said he figured it was the safest place in the entire conference to hide from them. He was funny. He was sincere. And he was, I learned, not at all what I expected. He didn't boast. He didn't talk about money. When I asked what he did, he just said, "I work at a finance firm in Seattle, mostly trying to keep my head down and not let my parents interfere too much." I felt an immediate, powerful kinship, a man trying to escape his parents' shadow. I was a woman who had never had parents to cast one. We seemed to fit. Our first year was the kind of thing I thought only happened in movies. It was built on the small things. It was late-night coffee and longer walks along the Seattle waterfront, debating economic theory. It was discovering a shared love for old, dusty bookstores and bad in a good way sci-fi movies. We took a weekend trip to Port Townsend, staying in a little bed and breakfast, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt safe. It was on that trip, sitting on a cold beach watching the ferry, that he opened up. He spoke about the suffocating pressure of his family. He didn't talk about their wealth as a privilege, but as a weight. "It's not "They don't see me," he'd said, throwing a small, flat rock across the water. "My father sees a successor. My mother sees, I don't know, a valuable asset that needs constant management." He told me, with a nervous laugh, that every major financial decision he made, right down to the lease on his car, had to be run past Mom's family office for approval. My heart ached for him. I saw a man trapped, a good person trying to carve out his own identity against an impossible, crushing force. I, who had built my entire identity from nothing, felt a fierce, protective urge. I thought everyone behaved differently under the shadow of their parents. I believed, with a dangerous, naive sincerity, that our love would be the thing that finally gave him the strength to stand on his own. I thought my strength could be his, until he was ready. I was a fool. I mistook a hostage for a hero. The second year of our relationship, the year we were engaged, was when the red flags began to appear. They were small at first, these little hairline fractures in our perfect story. Dates would be canceled at the last minute, always with a stressed, apologetic text. "So sorry, babe. Emergency family dinner. Mom is flying in from New York and it's mandatory." Or, "Dad called a family meeting. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was, but I pretended to. Then, after he proposed, the interference became direct. The wedding planning. I'm a planner. I build systems. I assumed we would do this together. Instead, I received an email, not from Oliver, but from Elaine Montclair. The subject line was simply, "Wedding, June." The body of the email was not a suggestion. It was a list of directives. "Elena, I have secured the Lakehurst Country Club for the 10th of June. This is the only weekend they have available. I have attached the preliminary guest list. Gregory and I have prepared. Please review and add your guests. Also, I have been in touch with Tessa Rowe, who will be handling the arrangements. You will meet with her next Tuesday." I stared at the screen. We had never discussed June. We had never discussed the country club. I had never heard of Tessa Rowe. I brought it up to Oliver, trying to keep my voice light. "Your mom seems very organized," I said, showing him the email. He winced, kissing my forehead. "Oh God, look, just let her have this. The wedding. It's a huge thing for her, for the family's image. It's easier to just let her handle the logistics. All that matters is you and me. At the end of the aisle, right?" I let it go. But the call with Tessa Rowe, the wedding planner, was the moment the floor began to truly dissolve beneath me. "Oh, Miss Ryan," she'd said, her voice a strained, professional chirp. "So lovely to meet you. I'm just finalizing the catering contracts and I wanted to confirm. All invoices are being routed through the Montclair Family Trust, correct? As you're not a signatory on the account, all the contracts are in the trust's name, not yours or Mr. Montclair's." A cold, sharp feeling pricked at the base of my skull. The trust? Not Oliver? There was a tight, awkward pause. "Ah, yes. The family office is handling all vendor payments. The entire event is being funded and legally executed by the trust. We just need you and Mr. Montclair to attend. I am a person who builds companies. I understand contracts. I understand entities. I understand ownership. And for the first time, I applied that logic to my own relationship. I didn't hire a private investigator. I didn't need to. The world runs on public data, if you know where to look. I spent one long, sick night doing what I do best: research. The beautiful, airy apartment Oliver had in Belltown, the one he was so proud of, it wasn't his. It was owned by a corporate entity named Lakehurst Properties, LLC. The sleek black Audi he drove? Leased by the same LLC. His investment portfolio he'd once vaguely mentioned? A managed fund? Held entirely within the Montclair Family Trust. The credit cards he used for our expensive dinners? They were corporate Amex cards, paid in full every month by the family office. Oliver wasn't a man. He was a subsidiary. He was a high-level employee given a very, very generous corporate perks package. He was a user, not an owner. But the ring, the proposal, that had to be real. I remembered his hands shaking as he opened the box. He'd told me he picked the diamond himself, that it was a rare cut. I had the appraisal paperwork he'd given me for my insurance. I pulled it out of my desk drawer. I looked at it, really looked at it, for the first time. The appraisal was standard, but stapled to the back was the original insurance rider, the one that had covered the stone before it was set in my ring. The policyholder was not Oliver Montclair. The policyholder was Elaine Montclair. She hadn't given it to him to give to me. She had loaned it to him. It was an asset, moved from one part of the family's balance sheet to another, a beautiful, sparkling, 2-carat lie. I had to confront him. I couldn't breathe until I did. I made dinner at my apartment. I kept it simple. I needed to be calm. He came in, kissed me, all smiles, all charm, completely oblivious. Halfway through the meal, I put my fork down. "Oliver," I said, my voice quiet, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not get defensive. I just need a real answer." He looked up, his smile fading. "Okay, what's wrong?" "The apartment in Belltown, is it actually in your name?" He froze. "What? What kind of question is that?" "Is it?" He flushed. It's complicated. Elena, it's for tax purposes. It's just how these things are done." "The car," I pressed, my voice still quiet, though my heart was hammering. "The credit cards. Oliver, do you own anything? Does anything actually belong to you?" "Of course, my clothes, my books." "I'm serious. Is there anything of value that your mother doesn't have the final signature on?" His face hardened. "You don't understand how it works. It's not about owning. It's about protecting the family. It's just the way rich people do things. Why are you suddenly attacking me?" "I am not attacking you," I said, and my voice finally broke, rising with a desperate frustration. "I am trying to find you. I am trying to find the man I am supposed to be marrying, because I'm looking at the wedding contracts, and I'm not on them, and you're not on them. It's a contract between your mother's trust and a catering company. I am not marrying you. Oliver, I am being merged into your family's corporate structure." He stared at me, his eyes wide, a flicker of fear in them. "Elena, that's not true." "Then show me," I pleaded. "Show me one thing that is yours, one decision you've made, that she can't veto." He had no answer. He just shut down, retreating back into the defensive. Practice shell. "You're being dramatic. It's just tax optimization." I knew then, even before the prenup dinner, that I wasn't in a partnership. I was in an acquisition, and the man I loved wasn't my partner. He was just the beautifully packaged, perfectly managed asset being used to conduct the transaction. After he left my apartment that night, visibly angry, accusing me of not being supportive, I stood on my small balcony. I looked out at the lights of Seattle, the same skyline I'd seen from the Montclair's cold, glass prison. I thought about the life I had built, every brick laid with my own hands, every dollar earned through my own mind. And I thought about the future he was offering. For the first time, when I thought about my wedding day, the word that flooded my mind wasn't future. It was escape. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. After walking away from the Montclair estate, I had driven aimlessly for an hour, the windshield wipers struggling against the Seattle mist, before finally returning to my apartment. I sat in the dark of my living room for what felt like hours, not moving, not even taking off my coat. I just watched the headlights of distant cars sweep across the walls, phantom shapes in the gloom. The silence of the apartment, usually my sanctuary, felt heavy and wrong, like a waiting room. My phone, which I'd left on the kitchen counter, began to vibrate, an angry buzzing sound on the granite. It buzzed again and again, a relentless series of texts. "Elena, please, pick up. I'm so sorry. That was not how I wanted that to happen. Please, let me come see you. Let me talk to you." Then, the buzz from the building intercom. He was downstairs. A part of me wanted to disconnect the intercom, throw my phone against the wall, and crawl into bed for a week. But another, colder, more curious part took over. I let him in. I needed one last piece of data. I needed to see his face, away from the oppressive power of his parents, and find out if the man I loved was still in there, or if he had been entirely hollowed out and replaced by the Montclair air. When he knocked, he didn't wait. He used the key I had given him. He looked terrible. His expensive, tailored coat was damp, his hair plastered to his forehead from the rain, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. He looked less like an heir to an empire and more like a shipwreck survivor. "Elena," he said, his voice cracking. He rushed toward me, trying to pull me into an embrace, but I held up a hand and he stopped, his arms hovering uselessly in the air. "God, Elena, I am so sorry," he said, the words tumbling out. I was completely blindsided. I had no idea they were going to do that tonight. Like that. Like that. The phrasing hit me like a small, sharp stone. Not that they did it, but the way they did it. He took my stillness as an invitation to keep talking. I knew they'd want something, he admitted, wringing his hands. It's how they are. But I thought it would be a conversation, something my lawyers and your lawyers could. I didn't know they would just throw it at you, at dinner. He was apologizing for the presentation, not the content. "I love you," he said, taking a cautious step closer. "That is the only thing that matters. That document, it's just paper. Elena, it's just their way. It doesn't change you and me. It doesn't mean anything." "It doesn't mean anything?" I asked, and my voice was so quiet, so flat. It barely sounded like my own. It felt like it meant everything. Oliver. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, just to have something to hold. He followed me, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "You know it's not like that," he pleaded. "It's an old-world thing. They're just protecting the family. They're trying to protect me." "Protect you from what?" I turned, my voice still dangerously calm. "From me? The woman you asked to marry you?" "No," he said, too quickly. "Not from you. From complications. From the law. It's just what people with their kind of money do. They don't know you. Elena, not like I do. I've been with you for 2 years. Oliver. I've had dinner with them half a dozen times. They know me." "They don't," he insisted, his voice rising in frustration. "They see everyone as a threat. They see everything as a transaction. I'm sorry. I should have warned you. I should have prepared you." He still didn't get it. He was apologizing for my feelings, not for the act itself, and he never once, not for a single second, used the word wrong to describe what his parents had done. It was aggressive, old world, unfortunate, but not wrong. I set the glass down. "I have one question. Oliver," I said, looking him directly in the eye, "and I need you to think very, very carefully before you answer it, because everything, for me, rests on this." He steeled himself, nodding, trying to look like the strong, supportive partner he so desperately wanted to be. "Anything. If it comes down to it, no compromises, no negotiations, just a choice. Me," I said, pointing to myself. "Or the signature on that contract your parents wrote." I needed him to say, "you." I needed him to say it instantly. I needed him to laugh, as if it was the most ridiculous question in the world, and say, "You, Elena," 1,000 times. "You, screw the contract. Screw their money." He didn't. He stared at me, his face a mask of genuine, profound agony. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He ran a hand through his damp hair, pulling at the roots. He paced from the kitchen doorway to the window, his back to me, staring out at the rain. "Why are you making it like that?" he finally whispered to the glass. "Why does it have to be a choice?" And there it was, the fatal, final answer. "I'm not the one making it a choice, Oliver," I said, my voice hollow. "They are, and you are, by not having an answer." He turned, his eyes wet with tears. "That's not fair. Elena, that's not fair. I love you. I want to marry you. And I love my family. I don't want to have to choose. I don't want to have to choose." The epitaph for our entire relationship. The rest of the conversation, the next hour, was just noise. It was a downward spiral of his pleading, his justifications, his desperate, circular talk of finding a compromise and talking to them and making them understand. He was a man trying to negotiate with a tidal wave. He was a man promising to build a house in the middle of a war zone. I was no longer angry. I was no longer hurt. I was just tired. The adrenaline that had carried me out of that house and through the drive home was gone, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion so profound it felt like an illness. "You should go, Oliver," I finally said, sinking onto the sofa. "I'm not leaving," he said stubbornly, his voice thick. "I'm not leaving you when we're like this." He sat on the ottoman opposite me, his head in his hands, a man defeated. I didn't have the energy to argue. I didn't have the energy to cry or to yell. I just laid back, pulling a throw blanket over my legs, and closed my eyes. I'm so tired," I murmured, and it was the truest thing I'd said all night. I don't know if he left. I don't know when. I just fell asleep. A heavy, dreamless, suffocating sleep, right there on the sofa, with the rain and the sound of my own broken hopes as a lullaby. I woke with a gasp. The apartment was pitch black. The silence was thick, absolute. It was that dead part of the night, 3 or 4 in the morning, where the world seems to stop. But something had woken me, a sound. A voice? My blood turned to ice. My first, terrified thought was that someone was in the apartment. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. Absolutely not. That is the final word. The voice was thin, metallic, and it was familiar. It was Elaine Montclair. I slid off the sofa, my feet silent on the cold wooden floor. I crept toward the kitchen, where I'd left my phone. The voice was coming from there. My phone. The screen was dark, but as I got closer, I saw the small green call in progress icon glowing in the corner. In my exhaustion, or Oliver's pacing, or in some random brush of fabric as I fell asleep. The phone had been activated. It must have redialed the last number in my log. Elaine, from the constant stream of wedding planner texts and calls. Her number was always at the top. The call had connected, silently, and the speakerphone, which I often used, was on its lowest possible volume, a tiny, tinny, devastating whisper. I stood in the darkness, inches from the counter, and listened. "Must understand, Oliver," Elaine's voice said. She sounded tired, but sharp, like a razor. "This isn't a negotiation. It is a condition of entry. If she does not sign, the wedding is canceled, period." I heard a heavy, drawn-out sigh on the other end. It was Oliver. He was at home, on his own phone, talking to his mother. My phone was a silent, accidental, 3-way conference call. "Mom, it's 3 in the morning," Oliver's voice pleaded, thick with a different kind of exhaustion than mine. I tried. I was just there. She's not..." "She's not what?" Elaine snapped. "Not intelligent? We know she is. She's not compliant. Oliver, that is the problem. This entire exercise is a test. It is a test of your ability to manage a situation, a test of your loyalty to this family. If you cannot make this girl, understand a simple, non-negotiable term, then you are not ready. You are not ready to lead this family, and you are certainly not ready to take a senior role at the holdings." A long, terrible silence stretched out. I could hear the faint static on the line, the sound of Oliver's breathing. I was frozen. My hand was over my mouth to stifle my own. The cold of the kitchen floor was seeping into my feet, but I couldn't move. This was not a family conversation. This was a corporate review. "I love her," Oliver finally whispered. and his voice was so small, so broken, it barely carried. I don't want to bully her. Then you are a fool, Elaine said, her voice dropping to a flat, cold line. You are confusing love with weakness. She signs, or she is gone, and you, Oliver, will have failed your first real test. I waited, I prayed, I willed the man I loved, the man I had spent 2 years building a life with, to say, then I fail, to say you're wrong, to say, how dare you speak about her that way. Another pause, a heavy breath. And then, I will try again. Oliver said, his voice was stronger now, resigned, the voice of an employee taking a difficult assignment. I'll fix it. I'll go see her in the morning. I'll make her understand. Please, just trust me. I'll handle it. See that you do, Elaine said. The line clicked dead. The call ended. The small green light vanished. I stood in the absolute, total silence of my kitchen for a full minute. The pain didn't come in a wave. It came as a single, sharp, clarifying stab. I did not cry. I did not throw the phone. I did not feel the urge to scream. The grief I felt wasn't for Oliver. It was for the naive, hopeful woman I had been. The one who believed she could be loved by people like that. That woman was dead. She had been executed in a 3-minute, accidental phone call. It was all so clear now. This wasn't a family. It was a corporation. The prenup wasn't a precaution. It was a job description. A job I was failing by having my own mind. And Oliver was not my partner. He was their agent, a willing one. In the end, he had made his choice. I sat down at my kitchen table, my hands clasped in front of me, and watched as the black sky over the Sound slowly turned a bruised, sickly gray. The rain had stopped. My pain, that deep, agonizing wound from the dinner table, had cooled. It had hardened, and it had sharpened. It wasn't pain anymore. It was a tool. I picked up my phone. I went to my contacts and found the one name that wasn't a fiancé, that wasn't a threat, the name that was my shield and was about to become my sword. I called Mara. It was 4:30 in the morning, so I knew it would go to voicemail. I was glad. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted to give instructions. I waited for the beep. Mara, I said, and I was startled by how calm and steady my voice was. It's me. I need you to cancel my morning. We have work to do. They want to play with contracts. Well, that's our game. I took a breath, staring at the first weak light of dawn. This time, I said, we're the ones holding the rules. By 6 a.m., I had showered, scrubbing the scent of the Montclair house and the damp rain from my skin. I had dressed, not in my comfortable sweats, but in dark jeans and a sharp black cashmere sweater. I had made coffee, black and strong. I was in my home office, my own laptop open, when I heard the precise, 3-rap knock on my door. Mara Quinn did not do mornings in the traditional sense. She did openings. She walked in wearing what was clearly yesterday's perfectly tailored suit, her red hair pulled into a severe, on-the-fly bun. A laptop bag slung over one shoulder and a cardboard tray with 2 large, steaming hot black coffees in her hand. Her face was a mask of razor-sharp focus. Her eyes, though tired, were already calculating. She didn't say, "Are you okay?" or "What's wrong?" She walked straight to the kitchen counter, set down the coffees, and said, "Talk." I took one of the cups. It was scalding hot, and I welcomed the pain. "I'm going to tell you everything," I said, my voice as calm as I had ever heard it. "And I need you to listen as my lawyer, not as my friend." Mara held my gaze for a long, heavy second. "I can't separate them, Elle, but the lawyer is the one taking notes. Go." I laid it all out. I was methodical. I was precise. I spoke the way I would when pitching an algorithm, removing all the messy human emotion and focusing on the data points. Data point 1, the dinner at the estate, the cold room, the marble, the feeling of being an asset under review. Data point 2. The prenup. I recited the key terms from memory: the complete waiver of all assets, the 24-hour eviction clause, and the insidious, brilliant subclause about reevaluating my own work into their family trust. Data point 3. Oliver's reaction. The whisper. Don't make a scene. Data point 4. The confrontation at my apartment. His confession that he'd been blindsided, but his total inability to call his parents' actions wrong. Data point 5. The question. Me or the contract? Data point 6. The answer. I don't want to have to choose. Mara listened, unblinking, her expression hardening with each point. She didn't interrupt. She just sipped her coffee, her eyes boring into mine. And then, I said, setting my cup down, there's data point 7, the one that changes the game. I told her about the exhaustion, falling asleep on the sofa, waking in the dark, the tiny metallic voice from my phone. I repeated the conversation I had overheard, word for word. Elaine, it is a test of your loyalty to this family. Elaine, if you cannot make this girl, understand, you are not ready. Oliver, I love her. Elaine, then you are a fool. And finally, Oliver's death knell promise. I'll handle it, trust me. When I finished, the silence in the apartment was absolute. Mara slowly, deliberately, put her coffee cup down on the counter. She looked angry. But it wasn't the hot, messy anger of a friend. It was the cold, focused, glacial anger of a lawyer who had just seen the opposing counsel commit a fatal, arrogant error. A test, Mara said, her voice a low growl. They think this is a test of his loyalty. They have no idea it's about to be a test of their solvency. So, I said, what do we do? What we don't do, Mara said, firing up her laptop at my dining table, is what they expect. They expect you to cry. They expect you to hire a second-rate divorce attorney to try and negotiate a few scraps. They expect you to go after Oliver's non-existent assets. They expect you to be emotional. They expect you to be weak. She looked up at me, a wolfish, almost feral grin on her face. They're about to be so disappointed. You're not going to be the girl who got dumped. You're going to be the woman who refused to sign. She tapped on her keyboard. They want a contract? Fine. We'll give them a contract. They want to protect their assets? Wonderful. We love protecting assets. We are going to draft a mirror, a prenup that reflects their terms. But with one crucial difference. It will be fair. For the next 4 hours, we worked. This was our element. This was the world we were born for. It was just like the old days at Nova Root, locked in a room, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of mission, building something indestructible. Mara opened a new document. Okay, let's start with their terms. Clause 1. Protection of premarital assets. We agree. 100%. Everything you built, earned, or inherited before the date of marriage remains yours. Everything he has remains his, or more accurately, his family's trusts. Done, I said. My trust, my holdings, Lumengrid, he never gets to touch them. His family's empire, I want no part of it. Good, Mara said, typing furiously. Clean, simple, mutual, now, the dirty part, the part they wrote to destroy you, the contribution in marriage clause. This was the part that had made me sick, the idea that my work, my sacrifice, would be reevaluated as a gift to their trust. This, I said, leaning over the table, is where we make it fair. I want a clause that values non-financial contributions. If a spouse stays home to raise children, manages the household, or sacrifices their own career advancement for the sake of the other. That contribution is to be valuated at a senior project manager's salary, benchmarked to the Seattle market, with interest, to be paid out as a lump sum from the other's personal estate upon dissolution. Mara stopped typing and looked up at me, one eyebrow raised. Elena Ryan, That is the single most cold-bloodedly romantic thing I have ever heard. It's not romantic, I said. It's equitable. If they believe in family, they should believe in valuing the work it takes to run one. They want to protect their assets? Good. This clause protects my future. It ensures that no matter what, the person who sacrifices more is not the person who leaves with less. Mara's fingers flew. Done. It's beautiful. It's so fair. It's offensive. They'll hate it. What else? This was it. The idea that had been forming in my mind since 4 a.m. I want a dignity clause, I said. Mara paused. That's not a legal term. Make it one, I said. I want it stipulated that this marriage is a partnership of equals, and if either party, or that party's family, uses any contract, this one included, or any financial instrument as a tool of coercion, threat, or manipulation. Mara's eyes lit up. She knew where I was going. The other party, she finished, has the right to unilaterally dissolve the engagement and any associated financial or social contracts without penalty, financial or otherwise. Exactly, I said. It's a poison pill. It's a clause that says, if you try to use this document to bully me, the document explodes and I walk away clean. It turns their entire strategy against them. It makes the prenup a test, just like Elaine said, but it's a test of their good faith, not my obedience. My God, Mara said, laughing a short, sharp laugh. You're basically giving them a loaded gun and saying, I trust you not to shoot me, but you've built a bulletproof vest into the handle. We spent another hour refining the language, making it airtight, making it simple. It was not a document of aggression. It was a document of profound, unbreakable boundaries. As Mara was formatting the final page, she paused. This is brilliant, Elle, but it's still a risk. They are a multi-billion-dollar entity. You are, well, you're a goddamn genius. But to them, you are one person. They can still try to crush you, contract or no contract. They can go after Lumengrid. They can try to blackball you in the industry. It was time. I turned from the dining table, walked to my laptop, and pulled up the investment dashboard. I spun the laptop around. They're a multi-billion-dollar entity, I said. But they're also a leveraged one. Look. Mara leaned in. Her eyes scanned the list of stocks, the funds, and then they landed on the line item for Montclair Holdings corporate bonds. She saw the principal amount. Her eyes widened, just slightly. You're a creditor, she whispered. A small one, I said, but a significant one, and that's not all. I opened a file. It was my own due diligence, conducted before I bought those bonds, public records, SEC filings, news articles. This isn't just about a relationship anymore. Mara, look at their debt-to-equity ratio. Look at this highly questionable acquisition of a shell company in Delaware last year, funded entirely by new debt. Look at the balloon payment due on this bond series in 18 months. They're not a fortress. They're a glass house. They're over-leveraged, and they're using their family reputation to hide a lot of risky, aggressive, and maybe unethical financial hijinks. Mara stared at the screen, then back at me. The lawyer was gone. The friend was gone. Now, she was the corporate assassin I knew and loved. Elena, she said, her voice full of a new, dangerous awe. You didn't just walk into a family dinner. You walked into a corporate liability, and they just handed you their creditor, their playbook. She turned back to her laptop. Okay, our strategy is simple. We don't leak. We don't hack. We don't do anything illegal. We don't even mention this. We are going to play this entire game using only what they have given us, what they have signed, and what they have publicly declared. She hit print. My old noisy laser printer whirred to life. It spat out 6 pages, not the inch-thick tome of their demands, but 6 clean, concise pages. We didn't use flashy, bald-embossed folders. I had a simple, dark blue leather portfolio, the one I used for my own business. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, professional. It looked, and felt, like what it was: serious, powerful, and understated. It was the physical opposite of the document they had given me. Theirs was a weapon of intimidation. This was a statement of fact. I slid the pages into the portfolio. I felt calm. I felt ready. "You're really going to do it?" Mara asked, packing her laptop. "You're going to go back there?" I looked at the simple, elegant portfolio on my table. "They want me to sign a contract to prove I'm worthy of their family," I said. "Instead, I'm going to give them one to see if they're worthy of me." I picked it up, the leather cool and smooth beneath my fingers. If they truly believe in fairness, they'll sign without hesitation, and if they don't, at least we'll know what they're afraid of. My phone buzzed relentlessly all morning. Dozens of texts from Oliver, each one more desperate than the last. "Elena, please, just talk to me. We can fix this. My parents are waiting. Let's just go see them together." I ignored them all. I had one final move to make, and I would make it on my own terms. At 2 p.m., I called the Montclair house, not Elaine, not Oliver, but the main house line. The same blank-voiced housekeeper from the previous night answered. "This is Elena Ryan," I said, my voice crisp and professional. "Please inform Mr. and Mrs. Montclair that I will be arriving at 3 p.m. to conclude our discussion from last night." Is Mr. Oliver with you?" she asked, a flicker of confusion in her voice. "No," I said. "I am coming alone." I hung up before she could respond. I did not take a taxi or an Uber. I did not drive the newer, practical sedan I usually used. I went to the back of my apartment's parking garage and uncovered my first car, a 10-year-old Honda, impeccably clean, perfectly maintained, but unmistakably modest. It was the car I had bought with my first big freelance check, the car that had carried me to my first failed investor meetings. It was a rolling, 1.5-ton statement of where I came from. I drove back up the winding, private road to Lakehurst Ridge. The gates seemed to part with a new reluctance, as if the security guard was confused by the sight of my vehicle. I parked the Honda not in a guest spot, but directly in the circular driveway, right in front of the massive, cathedral-like front doors, next to Gregory's black Bentley. It looked like a sparrow next to a vulture. It was a deliberate, silent statement. I was not ashamed of who I was, and I was done trying to blend in. I walked up the steps, carrying only the slim, dark blue leather portfolio. I didn't knock. I rang the bell. The same housekeeper opened the door. This time, her eyes met mine, and they were wide with a mixture of fear and, I thought, a tiny spark of respect. "They are in the dining room, Miss Ryan," she said, her voice a low murmur. I walked past her. I didn't need an escort. I knew the way. The scene was almost identical to the night before, a twisted tableau of our first meeting, the same cold room, the same sickly golden afternoon light. Gregory and Elaine were seated at the far end, not as a couple, but as a board. And standing just behind them, to the right of his father, was Oliver. He looked like he hadn't slept in a year. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes red and frantic. He was wearing a suit, but it looked rumpled, as if he'd been pacing in it all night. When he saw me, a wave of desperate relief washed over his face. He started to take a step forward. "Elena?" "Sit down, Oliver," Gregory commanded, not even looking at his son. Oliver froze, then, obediently, retreated to his position behind the throne. I walked the long, echoing length of the marble table. I did not sit. I stood at the end opposite Gregory, placing myself as his equal. "Thank you for seeing me," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the sterile air. Gregory Montclair gave a small, humorless laugh. "I must admit, Miss Ryan, I am intrigued. You have a flair for the dramatic, but we are busy people. Oliver tells us you had some reservations." "A misunderstanding, I'm sure," Elaine purred, her hands clasped on the table. Her eyes were chips of ice. "Oliver assured us you would be reasonable once you had time to think." She made it sound like an order he had failed to carry out. "Last night," I said, my voice clear and carrying, "you presented me with a document." I placed my own blue leather portfolio on the polished marble. The thud it made was quiet, solid, and final. "I am returning the favor. You gave me your version. This is mine." Gregory actually scoffed, a short, sharp sound of derision. "You're bargaining? With us? Miss Ryan, I find your confidence amusing, but this is not a negotiation." "Oh, Elena," Elaine said, her voice dripping with a condescending pity I now recognized as her primary weapon. "I know this must be difficult. You come from, well, you've done so well for yourself. But in this world, at this level, there are different rules. This isn't about you. This is about protecting a legacy. You're being offered a chance to join that legacy, to bear the Montclair name. What exactly do you have that needs protecting?" The air vibrated with their arrogance. They had me pegged, the poor little orphan, dazzled by the lights, now making a desperate, clumsy play for a bigger piece of the pie. I let the silence hang for a moment. Then, I opened my portfolio. I had a copy of their document. "Your legacy," I said, "is quite thorough. For example, your Clause 12B, the one that states that any intellectual, creative, or business contribution I make to any family-related endeavor is automatically deemed a contribution to the Montclair Family Trust, without expectation of remuneration or equity. In short," I said, looking up at Gregory, "you get to own my work, for free." Gregory's jaw tightened. "Standard. It protects the family from complications." "I see." I slid that paper aside and pulled a page from my own document. "Then you'll have no problem with my equivalent clause. 3A, the Mutual Contribution Clause. It states that all premarital assets, on both sides, remain separate and untouchable." I looked at Oliver. "My property, my companies, remain mine. Your family's trusts and holdings remain yours. We are equals." Elaine's smile faltered. "You have companies?" "And," I continued, ignoring her, "it stipulates that any non-financial contribution to the marriage, such as managing a household, raising children, or sacrificing a career for the sake of the partnership, will be valued at a senior executive's salary and compensated from the other's personal estate upon dissolution. It's an equity clause. It protects the partner who does the work, not just the one who holds the assets." Gregory's face darkened. "This is absurd." "Is it?" I asked. "I thought it was just fair." "Elena, please," Oliver begged from the sidelines. "This isn't helping. We can just talk." "We are talking, Oliver," I said, my voice softening for a second. "This is the most honest conversation we have ever had." I reached into the portfolio and pulled out one more item. It was a small, black, thumb-sized USB drive. I placed it gently on the table, between their document and mine. It sat there, small and insignificant, but it sucked all the air out of the room. "What is that?" Elaine asked, her eyes narrowing. "You called it a test," I said quietly. "Last night, or rather, early this morning, you said this entire exercise was a test of Oliver's loyalty." Elaine's face went from pale to bone white. Oliver looked like he was going to be sick. Gregory's eyes darted from his wife to his son, confusion and rage battling for dominance. "You said," I continued, my voice a calm, simple statement of fact, "that if he couldn't make this girl compliant, he wasn't ready to lead the family, and you told him he was a fool for confusing love with weakness." You recorded us?" Elaine hissed, half rising from her chair, her mask of civility completely shattered, revealing the fury beneath. That is illegal. It is inadmissible. It is a cheap, dirty trick." "Is it?" I asked. It was an accident, a phone in a pocket, a call that never disconnected, but it was illuminating. I'm not here to play it for you. I'm not here to release it to the press or to your board of directors. I looked Elaine directly in the eyes. I'm not here to blackmail you. I am here because I just want us all For one single moment, to be looking at the same, unvarnished truth. The purpose of your contract was not to protect your assets. It was to ensure my obedience, and to confirm his. That is a fact. I pushed the USB drive slightly forward, and that is a recording of the fact. Gregory looked like he had been slapped. He was a man of power, but he was a man who understood leverage, and he was finally seeing me. I am not the person you think I am, I said, my voice low. I am not a girl looking for a name or a home. I have a company. I have my own assets. I have built my own life, and I'm very good at protecting it. I came here today offering you the one thing you didn't offer me: equality, a partnership. I slid my document, the clean, 6-page mirror, to the center tray of the table, next to the USB drive. Then, I took a gold pen from the portfolio. I didn't hand it to Gregory. I didn't hand it to Elaine. I walked around the table and stood directly in front of the man I had loved. Oliver was trembling, his face ashen, caught between his parents' silent, furious glares and my quiet, steady one. I held the pen out to him. This is it, Oliver, I said softly, so only he could hear. No more time, no more talking. You said you didn't want to choose, and you were right. You shouldn't have to. I raised my voice so his parents could hear every word. If you believe in us, Oliver, then this contract is just a formality. It proves we are partners. If you believe what we have is real and fair and strong enough, you'll sign it. You'll sign it, and you'll show them, and you'll show me, who you are. I placed the pen in his hand. His fingers were cold, limp. He looked at the document. He looked at me, his eyes screaming with a silent, agonizing plea. Don't make me do this. Then, he looked at his parents. Gregory was silent, his face a granite mask of judgment. But Elaine just stared at him. She didn't say a word. She just tilted her head, a small, almost imperceptible motion, her eyes as cold and sharp as a command. Don't you dare. Oliver's hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. He looked at the paper. He looked at his mother. He looked at me. And I saw it. The moment he broke, the moment the man I loved ceased to exist, and the asset, the heir, the good, obedient son, took his place forever. He let out a small, shuddering breath. I need more time, Elena, he whispered, his voice cracking. It's just so much. I can't. He couldn't. He wouldn't. I stared at him for a long, empty moment. The pain I expected to feel wasn't there. There was just a profound, quiet, and terrible sadness, a finality. I smiled, a small, sad smile that was just for him. I don't, I said. I gently took the pen from his limp, shaking fingers. I capped it with a soft, definitive click. I left the pen on the table. I left my contract on the table. I left the USB drive on the table. They were exhibits in a trial that had just concluded. Thank you for your time, I said to the room. I turned, and I walked away. I walked the long, silent path back to the foyer. My heels clicked on the marble. Each step a final, steady beat, a full stop. I walked out of the massive front doors, into the bright, cold afternoon. I got into my old, clean, paid-for Honda. I started the engine, and I drove away. I didn't look back. I hadn't lost. I hadn't failed. I hadn't been defeated in love. I had just, for the first time in my life, in the face of the biggest, most glittering temptation, finally and completely chosen myself. The drive away from the Montclair estate was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove. My old Honda's engine a quiet, steady hum against the overwhelming, echoing silence in my head. There was no victory. There was no rage. There was only the quiet, cold, and absolute click of a door locking into place. The part of my life that had included Oliver Montclair was over. I didn't go back to my apartment. I went to a small, 24-hour coffee shop downtown, the kind of place with anonymous vinyl booths and weak, bitter coffee. I sat in the back, opened my laptop, and at 3 in the afternoon, I began to logistically and methodically erase my own wedding. This was not an act of passion. It was an act of administration. First, the email to the small Seattle couturier who was designing my dress. I had paid the 50% deposit myself, with my own card, months ago. Dear Simone, I wrote, due to a change in personal circumstances, I will not be moving forward with the wedding or the dress. Please accept this email as my formal cancellation. I understand the deposit is non-refundable. Next, the email to the makeup artist, canceled. The hotel block for the small handful of friends and my grandmother's cousins I had invited, canceled. Each click of the send button felt like a small, clean cut, severing of a thread. Finally, I was left with the one call I had to make. Tessa Rowe, the high-strung, terrifyingly efficient wedding planner who, as she had reminded me, worked for the Montclair Family Trust, not for me. I dialed her office, the line clicked, and her impossibly polished voice answered. Tessa Rowe Planning, this is Tessa. Tessa, this is Elena Ryan. The silence on the other end was immediate. I could hear a faint, high-pitched ringing, as if she was holding her breath. Miss Ryan? She finally said, her voice a tight, strained wire. I was expecting to hear from Mrs. Montclair. We have the final floral proof. I'm calling to inform you, I said, my voice calm and low, that I will not be attending or participating in the wedding on June 10th. Please consider this my formal notification of withdrawal. A sound I had never heard from Tessa Rowe. A small, choked-off gasp. I don't understand. What do you mean? You withdraw. Miss Ryan, the contracts, all contracts, are signed by the trust. We are a week out. The deposits are locked. The international flights are booked. We are talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in obligations. Tessa, I said, as you have pointed out to me on several occasions, I am not a signatory on any of those contracts. Your business is with the Montclair Family Trust. I am simply informing you, as a courtesy, that the bride will not be there. But you can't, she squeaked, the panic finally breaking through. Elaine, Mrs. Montclair, she will... That is a matter for you and your client, I said. Goodbye, Tessa. I hung up. I closed my laptop. The bomb had been planted. I simply had to wait. I didn't know the specifics of what happened next until much later, but I could have predicted the blast radius. That phone call, I learned, sent Tessa Rowe into a full-blown meltdown in her glass-walled office. She was screaming, literally screaming, at her subordinates. How do I tell Elaine Montclair the bride just quit? A junior assistant, a young woman who had apparently been brought to tears by Elaine 3 days prior for failing to source the correct shade of Montclair ivory napkin, overheard the entire tirade. She slipped into the break room, her hands shaking, and typed a message into a private Facebook group. Seattle Wedding Professionals, private. The post, which I saw much later, was a work of art. You will not believe this. The big Montclair wedding, the one we've all been losing sleep over, the bride just called, canceled the whole thing, a week out, said she formally withdraws. Word from the florist's team is that the Montclairs tried to force a brutal, ironclad prenup on her at dinner and the girl just got up and walked out. Elaine is going to have a full-on nuclear meltdown. The group had over 3,000 local event industry members. It took less than an hour for someone to take a screenshot. By 7 p.m., that screenshot was on Twitter. By 9 p.m., it was on Reddit. I was at home, eating a salad out of a container, when the first tremor hit the public. A local Seattle society blogger, the kind who makes a living tracking the city's old and new money, posted the first official article. He had been clever. He had seen the chatter, gone to the county's public records portal, and pulled the marriage license application for Oliver G. Montclair and Elena K. Ryan. It was real. The headline was a masterpiece of legal-safe insinuation. Montclair heir's wedding abruptly canceled. Sources allege prenup dispute. The article itself was simple. It laid out the players: the incomprehensibly wealthy, multi-generational Montclair family, the massive, society-defining wedding, and the unknown, unnamed beyond the license, Elena Ryan. The article focused entirely on the injustice. It didn't paint me as anything other than a victim. It embedded the screenshot. It asked the question: what could be in a prenuptial agreement that would make a bride walk away from one of the most powerful families in America, just days before the wedding? The internet, given a vacuum, supplied its own narrative, and it was a narrative I could never have written. Social media exploded. The hashtag started trending in the Seattle area. Then nationally: marriage is not merger. Stand with the bride. Montclair greed. I wasn't a person. I was a symbol. I was the anonymous every woman who had been crushed by the 1%. I was the brave, penniless girl who had chosen dignity over a gilded cage. Women, thousands of them, began sharing their own stories of financial abuse, of overbearing in-laws, of being forced to choose between themselves and a man. This Elena Ryan is my hero. One viral tweet read, "They thought they were buying a wife. She showed them she wasn't for sale." I watched it all, silently, from my sofa. I did not like a single post. I did not comment. I did not fan the flames. I didn't have to. The fire was burning all on its own. The next morning, the Montclairs did exactly what I expected them to do. They made it worse. Montclair Holdings, the publicly traded, multi-billion-dollar corporation, issued a formal press release. It was a move of such staggering arrogance, it left me breathless. Montclair Holdings is aware of certain baseless rumors circulating on social media regarding a private family matter. It read, "We do not, as a rule, comment on speculation, gossip, or the personal lives of our executives. We consider this matter closed." The public backlash was instantaneous and furious. A private family matter that you're using your corporate PR team and shareholder resources to comment on? Weak, one response said. Translation: "How dare the peasants question our right to be feudal lords?" Another read. By trying to use their corporate power to silence a personal story, they had just confirmed to the entire world that, to them, there was no difference between the family and the corporation. The line was blurred, or perhaps it had never existed at all. And then, the story pivoted. While the gossip blogs and Twitter mobs were busy debating the morality of prenups, a different kind of analyst was reading the story. He was a small, independent financial blogger who ran a niche Substack called Pacific Tech and Capital. His name was Alex Wu, and he had a very, very long memory. That afternoon, his post went live. The headline, "Who is Elena Ryan? The Montclair prenup story might be more than just gossip." I read it, my heart hammering. While social media is busy casting Elena Ryan as a penniless bride who stood up to the dragon, he wrote, "I'm wondering if she's the dragon herself." A search of Washington corporate filings from 6 years ago shows an E.K. Ryan as the founder and CEO of Nova Root Labs, the logistics AI startup that was acquired by Transglobal Tech for an undisclosed, but rumored, 9-figure sum. He continued, "The terms of that acquisition were famously, almost violently, sealed by NDAs. The founder, E. Ryan, vanished from the public eye, taking a rumored, massive payout. Is this the same Elena Ryan that the Montclair family just tried to protect their assets from? If so, this isn't a story about a gold digger. It's a story about a family of financial titans who, through sheer arrogance, just tried to hand a prenup to a woman who might be richer and smarter than they are. It raises one terrifying question for their investors. If their due diligence on their own future daughter-in-law was this bad, what does their due diligence on their acquisitions look like?" It was a twist the media could not resist. The ambiguity made it irresistible. The NDAs made me a ghost, a mystery. Was I the penniless victim or the secret tech queen? The narrative flipped on a dime. The stock of Montclair Holdings, which had been built on a reputation of impenetrable, old-world stability, began to wobble. It wasn't a crash. It was a bleed. It dropped 2%, then 3%. The investor forums lit up like a Christmas tree. "This isn't about a wedding," one verified investor wrote. "This is about governance. This is about the character and judgment of the CEO and chairwoman. If they treat a future family member like this, someone they know has power, how do they treat us, the minority shareholders?" I sat in the dark of my apartment, watching the ticker. A 3% drop on a company of that size represented a loss of hundreds of millions of dollars in market cap, all because of a single, arrogant, gold-embossed folder. Mara came over around 10 p.m. She didn't knock, just used her key. She was carrying a bottle of very expensive whiskey. She poured 2 glasses. Neat. "You're enjoying this," she said. It wasn't a question. I watched the red numbers on the stock ticker freeze as the after-hours market closed. "I'm not enjoying it," I said quietly, taking the glass. "I'm just observing. I told Oliver I wanted us all to see the truth. He wouldn't. I told his parents the same. They wouldn't. So now, the world is holding up the mirror for them." I took a sip. "I don't need to destroy them, Mara. I just need them to see themselves." Mara swirled the whiskey in her glass, her face grim. "They won't see themselves, Elena. They're going to see you, and they are not going to take a 9-figure hit to their reputation and their market cap lying down. They are going to come for you, with everything they have. They're going to paint you as the one who leaked this. They're going to use their legal army to try and crush Lumengrid, just for spite." I turned away from the news feeds. I looked at my own laptop, still open to my secure investment portal. I looked at the long list of my holdings, my stocks, my funds, and I looked at the quiet, significant line item for Montclair Holdings corporate bonds. "Let them," I said, meeting her gaze. I didn't come to this fight empty-handed. Mara's warning was not prophecy. It was a simple statement of fact, a family, a corporation. An empire built on the idea of its own infallibility cannot and will not tolerate being embarrassed. The 9-figure drop in their market cap was not, to them, a lesson. It was an insult. It was blood in the water. And they were surrounded by lawyers who saw me as the shark. The retaliation began, as it always does with people like the Montclairs, not in the shadows, but in a sun-blasted, sterile boardroom on the 40th floor of their corporate headquarters. I wasn't there, but Mara, through her network of legal contacts, painted the picture for me. Gregory and Elaine, flanked by their general counsel, their chief of communications, and a half-dozen external crisis PR specialists who billed by the hour, had convened an emergency reputation management session. The objective, as Mara explained it, was simple. The narrative had to be reset. They had, up until now, been forced to play defense against 2 toxic and contradictory public images: the heartless bullying aristocrats and the clueless investors who had been outsmarted by a tech ghost. They needed a new narrative, one they could control. Their legal team and PR gurus settled on the oldest, most reliable one in the book, the jilted gold digger. The strategy was simple: to make me look greedy, unstable, and vindictive. If they couldn't silence the story, they would silence the main character by burying her in accusations. The first salvo was clumsy, a brute force attack typical of Gregory. Their legal team, a white shoe firm that normally handled mergers and acquisitions, drafted and sent a flurry of aggressive cease and desist letters. They were sent via courier to the Seattle Society blogger, to the tech blogger, and to half a dozen minor social media influencers who had posted the most viral takes. The letters were full of bluster, accusing them of defamation, tortious interference, and malicious falsehoods. They threatened lawsuits that would span decades and cost millions. They were designed to terrify. For the most part, it worked. 3 of the influencers deleted their posts immediately. The Society blogger issued a terrified, mealy-mouthed retraction, clarifying that the Prenup story was an unconfirmed rumor. But they had made a mistake, a fatal, arrogant mistake. One of their threatening letters, sent to a small, independent online news outlet, had been addressed not to the writer of the puff piece, but to the outlet's editor-in-chief. That editor passed it along to his senior investigative reporter, a man who had been idly pulling at the thread of the Montclair Family Foundation for the better part of a year. He was a journalist who had long suspected that the foundation, their single greatest source of good PR and massive tax write-offs, was little more than a sophisticated shell company, a slush fund for pet projects and dark executive compensation. To this reporter, Gregory's letter wasn't a threat. It was a gift. It was a loud, angry, panicked flare shot up in the dark, confirming that the family was vulnerable, angry, and making mistakes. It was the confirmation he needed that this was a thread worth pulling. He didn't just ignore the letter. He opened a new, dedicated file on Montclair Holdings and began to dig, not into my life, but into theirs. While the legal threats were making noise, the second arm of their attack was moving in silence. Mara received a call. It was not from the aggressive litigation firm. It was from a different lawyer, a man she described as a silken, silver-haired negotiator, the kind of man families like the Montclairs keep on retainer to clean up their children's messes. He was all apologies. He called the whole situation a tragic misunderstanding, an emotional collision. He said that all parties had been deeply wounded. He was, in short, the velvet glove. "He wants a meeting," Mara told me. Her phone pressed to her ear as she stood in my apartment doorway. "I'm not meeting with them," I said. "Not with them," Mara said, a small, dangerous smile on her face. "With him, he's been authorized to make you a generous offer to compensate for the," and I quote, "emotional distress and public invasion of your privacy." "Let me guess," I said. "A check?" "A check," Mara confirmed, and from his hints, a significant one. 6 figures. At least, he also vaguely mentioned a portfolio of beneficial stock options in a future IPO. He called it a parting gift to wish you well in your future endeavors. "And in exchange," I said, already knowing the answer, "an ironclad, permanent, mutual non-disclosure agreement, one that would cover not just the prenup, not just the wedding, but your entire relationship with Oliver, and any and all knowledge, personal or professional, you have of the Montclair family or their businesses." It was the move of a chess player finally realizing they were in a match. They were no longer trying to intimidate me. They were trying to buy me. They were trying to put a price tag on my silence. "Tell him no," I said. "Are you sure?" Mara asked, though she was already grinning. "It's a lot of money. It's go away and be rich money." "I am already rich, Mara," I said, "and I'm not for sale. Tell him I am flattered, but I do not require a healing fund. Tell him I am not interested in any agreement. Tell him nothing. Just say no." My refusal was not a negotiating tactic. It was a statement. By refusing their money, I retained the one thing they could not buy and could not take, the moral high ground, and the legal right to tell my story if and when I chose. And that, finally, was the thing that made Gregory snap. My refusal to take their money, combined with the news that the investigative reporter was now openly asking questions about their family foundation, sent him into a rage. If I wouldn't be silenced by threats, and I wouldn't be bought by an offer, I would be crushed by force. The call came to Lumen Grid's COO 2 days later. It was from Montclair Maritime Logistics, a wholly owned subsidiary of Montclair Holdings. It was a mid-level, 8-figure contract for our AI services, optimizing their port-to-rail container traffic in the Pacific Northwest. It was not our biggest contract, but it was a significant one. The call was brief. They were terminating the contract, effective in 90 days. When our COO asked for a reason, we had, by all metrics, increased their efficiency by over 15% in the last quarter. The Montclair executive had read, woodenly, from a script. A strategic review of our vendor relationships has led us to move our logistics solutions in-house. It was a lie. It was a spiteful, clumsy, and purely punitive act. Gregory was using his public company's assets to fight his son's personal battle. He was trying to bleed my company, to hurt me financially, to prove that he could, and would, destroy what I had built. It was a declaration of war, and it was the single stupidest mistake he could have possibly made. Mara and I were in my office, looking at the termination letter. He's violating his fiduciary duty to his own shareholders, Mara fumed, pacing. He is deliberately making a bad business decision, canceling a high-performing vendor to settle a personal score. This is grounds for a shareholder lawsuit. We can take this public. No, I said, staring at the letter. My mind was moving, not like a lawyer's, but like an algorithm, processing connections. He's done something worse. He doesn't know it yet. I stood up and went to the whiteboard in my office. Mara, I said, picking up a black marker. Who is the lead bondholder on Montclair's last round of corporate debt? The $500 million one from 2 years ago? I don't know off the top of my head. Apex Capital Investors, I think. Why? I drew a box and wrote, Montclair Holdings. I drew another box and wrote, Lumengrid. I drew a third, much larger box, and wrote, Apex Capital. Gregory just canceled our contract with his subsidiary, Montclair Maritime, I said. Right, Mara said, not following. But Mara, I said, drawing a thick, solid line from Lumengrid to Apex Capital. Montclair Maritime was just one client. Who is our biggest client? Who did we just sign the $100 million exclusive deal with to manage their entire global shipping and logistics portfolio? Mara's eyes went wide. Apex Capital. And what does Apex Capital invest in? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Infrastructure, Mara whispered, the pieces clicking into place. Ports, shipping, rail lines, oh my God, Gregory, in his rage, had forgotten to read his own briefing books, I said. He's a CEO who only looks up at his stock price, never down at his operational dependencies. He knows he owes a fortune to Apex Capital. He did not know, or did not care, that we are the ones who run their entire system. I drew a line from Apex Capital to Montclair Holdings and labeled it Lender. I then drew a line from Montclair Maritime, the company that just fired us, to Apex Capital. The containers that Montclair Maritime moves, they're part of the Apex supply chain, the one we, Lumengrid, manage. By canceling our contract, Gregory has, in effect, personally taken a sledgehammer to the supply chain of his own banker. This was no longer a personal dispute. This was a matter of extreme corporate risk. We did not call the press. We did not call a litigation lawyer. We assembled a package. It was a simple, devastatingly professional dossier. It was not emotional. It was not accusatory. It was just a timeline of facts. Exhibit A, a timeline. Day 1, wedding canceled. Day 2, Montclair stock drops 3%. Day 3, Elena Ryan refuses a significant financial settlement in exchange for an NDA. Day 4, a high-performing logistics contract with Elena Ryan's company is abruptly and inexplicably terminated by a Montclair subsidiary. Exhibit B, the contract performance reviews, showing Lumengrid was exceeding all metrics for Montclair Maritime. Exhibit C, a simple, clear diagram showing the relationship between Montclair, Lumengrid, and Apex Capital. It showed, in stark, undeniable terms, that the CEO of Montclair Holdings had just sabotaged the core business operations of his own largest creditor. We added one more thing, a copy of the publicly available, though obscure, filings for the Montclair Family Foundation, showing the questionable flow of money into its administrative fees. We did not send this to the press. We sent 2 copies, via bonded courier, marked confidential for addressees' eyes only. One went to the Chief Risk Officer of Apex Capital Investors. The other went to the Head of Corporate Governance at Northern Trust Bank, Montclair's other primary lender. We did not make a single demand. We did not make a single threat. We simply, and quietly, asked the question, is this the kind of erratic, personal, and self-defeating governance you want protecting your nine-figure investment? The response was not a cannonball. It was the slow, silent, and terrifying closing of a valve. 2 days later, Gregory Montclair woke up to find that the $300 million revolving line of credit that Montclair Holdings used for its day-to-day operations and cash flow had been, pending a governance review, frozen by his bank. The squeeze was on. The retaliation had not just failed, it had ricocheted and hit him directly in the aorta. The emergency board meeting was called that afternoon. Gregory was, by all accounts, apoplectic. He was red-faced, screaming, blaming the banks, blaming the market, but blaming me most of all. "She's sabotaging us," he roared, slamming his fist on the polished mahogany table. That girl, she is deliberately trying to ruin this company." The room was silent, filled with the terrified, well-paid sycophants who comprised his board. But one man, an older, retired banker named Arthur Wellington, who had been on the board for 20 years, simply steepled his fingers, his face grim. "Is she Gregory?" Arthur asked, his voice the only calm thing in the room. "Or did she just hold up a mirror, and we are the ones who chose to look away?" A boardroom is a peculiar kind of theater. It is not a place of ideas. It is a place of leverage. It is a stage where power is not demonstrated by volume, but by who can sit the stillest, who can speak the softest, and who holds the one undeniable fact that makes all other facts irrelevant. The emergency meeting of the Montclair Holdings Board was not called by Gregory. It was demanded by his creditors. When a company's primary bank freezes its nine-figure revolving line of credit, it is the equivalent of a hospital cutting off a patient's oxygen. The patient must then, immediately, answer to everyone who holds their debt. The call came to me, not from Mara, but from the COO of Apex Capital Investors. "Elena," he'd said, his voice clipped and free of pleasantries, "we are attending an emergency session of the Montclair Board in 24 hours. Northern Trust will be there. We will be there, and several other key institutional bondholders, given that your company, Lumengrid, is the linchpin of our logistics portfolio, the same portfolio Mr. Montclair has just destabilized. We are invoking the key advisor clause in our contract. You will be attending with us." It was not a question. It was a summons. "The Montclairs," the COO finished, "are under the impression they are having a governance review. What they are actually having is an intervention, and you are the evidence." I did not wear the simple, modest clothing I had worn to the estate. I did not wear the power suit Mara would have chosen. I wore what I wore when I was pitching Nova Root, when I was nothing but an algorithm and a belief, a simple, perfectly tailored dark gray vest and trousers, a white silk shell, and low heels. I wore my hair pulled back. I looked like what I was, a builder, not a bride, not a victim, not an heiress, a builder. I walked into the 41st floor boardroom of Montclair Holdings, not alone, but flanked by two men, the managing director of Apex Capital and the stone-faced head of corporate credit from Northern Trust Bank. The room was long, dominated by a mahogany table so polished it looked wet. The permanent board members, Gregory's allies and sycophants, were already seated, looking nervous. And at the head of the table, Gregory Montclair himself, looking thunderous, his face a mottled, angry red. Beside him, in a chair slightly back from the table, sat Elaine. She was not a board member, but she was the Queen Regent, and her presence was a given. She was dressed in immaculate white, a defiant, sterile angel in a room dark with fear. And then there was Oliver. He was seated at the far end of the table, in a junior chair, like an intern or a child brought to his father's office. He was pale, hollow-eyed, and looked like he hadn't slept since I'd last seen him. When the three of us walked in, the room fell into a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Oliver's head snapped up. He saw me, and his face, which was already pale, went the color of ash. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Elaine's reaction was more controlled. Her hand, which was lifting a glass of water, simply froze in midair. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a single, bloodless line. She knew, in that instant, that the rules of the game had fundamentally and permanently changed. Gregory, however, did not understand. He just saw the enemy, in his room. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, gesturing at me. "This is a closed meeting of the board." The banker from Northern Trust, a man named Mark Calloway, did not even look at Gregory. He walked to the table, set down his leather portfolio, and addressed the entire room. "This is an extended session. Gregory," Calloway said, his voice a cold, flat baritone that cut through Gregory's bluster. "It has been called at the request of the company's primary lenders and largest creditors to address urgent and material concerns regarding governance, executive judgment, and potential breaches of fiduciary duty." He then nodded at me. "Ms. Ryan is here at the express request of Apex Capital as a key advisor on the operational integrity of your maritime division, which, as you know, is integral to their portfolio." He had just, without raising his voice, defined my position. I was not the ex-fiancé. I was a non-negotiable part of the proceedings. I took a seat, not at the main table, but in a chair just behind the Apex team, a position of an advisor. I opened my laptop. The execution began. "We can start," Calloway said, "with the Montclair Family Foundation." A slide appeared on the massive screen at the end of the room. It was not my slide. It was the bank's. "We have concerns," Calloway said, "about the recent, significant loans made from Montclair Holdings, a public company, to this private, family-controlled charitable foundation. Specifically, this $60 million loan, made just before the end of the last quarter, which we now suspect was a mechanism to move a significant operational loss off the corporate balance sheet. It looks, to us, like a way to hide a hole." "That is a baseless allegation," Gregory roared. "Is it?" the Apex director cut in, his voice sharp. "Because it looks suspiciously like the creative accounting we've seen in the public filings for your last 3 acquisitions, all of which are underperforming, and all of which are being propped up by a network of shell companies that seem to exist only to shuffle debt. We'd like to talk about those." For 20 minutes, I watched them dissect the Montclair empire. They used only public data. Just as I had. They had seen the same things I had seen: the over-leveraging, the risky acquisitions, the opaque structures. The empire was a house of cards, and the family's reputation was the only thing holding it together. "Which brings us," Calloway said, "to the Maritime Division." The Apex director nodded at me. "Ms. Ryan?" This was my cue. I did not stand. I simply unmuted my laptop and took control of the screen. "Good afternoon," I said. The sound of my own voice, calm and clear, echoed in the tense room. "I am not here to discuss the bank's financial concerns. I am here as the CEO of LumenGrid to discuss operations, at Apex's request. I've prepared a simple analysis of your current logistical vulnerabilities." A new slide appeared. It was a flowchart. "This," I said, "is a map of the Montclair subsidiary network, based on your public filings. As you can see, the flow of capital and the flow of operational reporting are complex." I pointed to the screen. "A payment from one subsidiary to another, routed through a holding company in Delaware, which then pays a vendor in Singapore, is not operationally efficient. It is, however, an excellent way to obscure costs and liabilities." I didn't accuse, I just stated. Then, I clicked to the next slide. "This," I said, "is the LumenGrid operational model. It is the model we are currently deploying for Apex Capital." The slide was beautiful. It was clean, a simple direct line from client to contract to service to payment. Every dollar was accounted for. Every metric was transparent. "We believe," I said, "that a transparent, long-term contract model is the most efficient way to manage logistics. It provides stability, clarity, and most importantly, measurable, auditable results." I left the slide up. The contrast was stark. It was an image of clean, modern, efficient business. next to the memory of their complex, dirty, tangled web. I was done. I had made my point without ever mentioning my name, or a prenup, or a single personal detail. The room was silent. Gregory was staring at the screen, his jaw working, as if he was chewing on glass. And then, Arthur Wellington, the old banker from Gregory's board, spoke. He was the one I had read about, the last remaining member from the old guard, before Gregory had stacked the board with his friends. "Ms. Ryan," Arthur said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Gregory. "That is an impressive presentation. It clarifies a great deal." He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "It clarifies, for example, why Apex Capital would be so concerned about your leadership, which leads me to a question I must, as a board member, ask you, Gregory." Gregory's head snapped toward him, surprised. "I have been reading the news," Arthur said, his voice slow and deliberate. "I, like the rest of the board, received the panicked call from your PR team about the family matter that was causing a dip in our stock, and I see Ms. Ryan, the CEO of this highly efficient company, sitting in this room." He paused, letting the pieces connect. "So, my question, Gregory, is this: if everything is, as you say, clean, why did this board feel the need to pressure your son's fiancé into signing a prenuptial agreement that reportedly stripped her of all rights? And more to the point, why did Montclair Holdings, our public company, immediately and inexplicably terminate a high-performing contract with Ms. Ryan's company the moment that engagement was broken?" He looked around the table. "Because it seems to me, it looks to any rational investor, that you used our corporate assets to settle a personal, family vendetta, and in doing so," he said, his voice dropping, "you not only breached your duty to this company's shareholders, you simultaneously and catastrophically destabilized the operations of our single largest creditor." The bomb had finally, officially, gone off. Elaine stood up. She actually stood up, her chair scraping loudly. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice shaking with a cold, aristocratic fury. "You are not to speak of my son. This is a family matter. It has nothing to do with this company." It was Mark Calloway, the banker, who answered her. He didn't stand. He just looked at her, his face devoid of expression. "Mrs. Montclair," he said, his voice flat, "when your family matter costs your shareholders 9 figures in market cap, and when your family matter threatens to default on a $500 million credit line, it is no longer a family matter, it is a governance crisis. Please, sit down." Elaine Montclair, for the first time in her life, was ordered. She stared at him, her mouth open, and then, slowly, she sat. The power had visibly and permanently left her. It was then that Oliver, at the far end of the table, made a small, choked sound. Everyone turned. He was white, his hands visibly shaking, his eyes fixed on me. She didn't want to do this," he whispered, his voice cracking, a pathetic, useless defense. She's not trying to destroy anything. She just wanted it to be fair." His voice was a ghost in the room. It was the plea of a man who had never existed. No one responded. It was as if he hadn't spoken at all. His words were irrelevant. He was irrelevant. Arthur Wellington nodded slowly, as if Oliver's words had simply confirmed his final thought. "Thank you, Oliver," he said. With a voice of pure, cold finality, he then turned to the board. "I believe," Arthur said, his voice booming in the quiet room, "that we have all the information we need. The personal and the corporate, in this family, are one and the same, and they are both, in my opinion, rotten." He looked at Gregory. "In accordance with the bylaws of this corporation, and with the clear and present demands of our lenders, I am calling for a vote, right now." Gregory's eyes were wide, panicked. "A vote on what? Arthur, don't be a fool." Arthur stood, placing both his hands on the table. "I move," he said, "for the immediate suspension of Gregory Montclair as Chief Executive Officer, pending the results of a full, independent, and bank-supervised forensic investigation into the financial activities of this company and the Montclair Family Foundation." Gregory Montclair looked like he had been shot. He stared, his mouth open, unable to form a word. Elaine let out a small, sharp gasp, her hand flying to her throat. I just sat there, my hands clasped in my lap. I did not feel joy. I did not feel victory. I didn't even feel relief. I just felt the cold, hard, satisfying click of a complex system finally, and inevitably, arriving at its only logical conclusion. The vote was not a formality, it was an execution. Gregory was suspended by a majority so overwhelming that even his most loyal sycophants, seeing the cold, hard faces of the bankers in the room, had defected. Elaine, in an act of pure, desperate self-preservation, had actually nudged a board member beside her to vote aye, a last-ditch attempt to distance herself from the man she had controlled for 30 years. It didn't matter. They were both, in that moment, finished. I left before the final motion was even tabled. My part was done. I had not cast a vote. I had not raised my voice. I had simply presented a mirror, and the board, once forced to look, had been horrified by the reflection. The days that followed were a blur, not for me, but for the financial press. The independent, bank-supervised forensic audit was not a quiet affair. It was, as Mara called it, a corporate autopsy, and the findings were grotesque. The auditors, unbound by family loyalty, tore through the beautifully crafted lies of the Montclair empire. They found exactly what Calloway and I had suspected. The $60 million loan to the Montclair Family Foundation was indeed a desperate and illegal maneuver to hide a catastrophic loss from an acquisition in South America. The foundation itself was a piggy bank, a mechanism for paying out undeclared executive bonuses, mostly to Gregory and Elaine, and funding their lavish, tax-deductible lifestyle. They found a web of offshore shell companies, designed not just for tax avoidance, but to actively manipulate the company's reported earnings, making it look stable and profitable when it was, in reality, a deeply leveraged, teetering house of cards. This time, the leaks weren't gossip from a wedding planner. They were devastating, clinical reports from the auditors themselves, dripped with surgical precision to the major financial news outlets. The headlines were brutal. The Seattle Times called it, "The Montclair House of Mirrors: How an Empire of Family Values Was Built on Financial Illusion." The Wall Street Journal was more direct. "Montclair Holdings Plunges on Governance Crisis. CEO and Chairwoman Face Investigation for Fraud." The story was no longer about a jilted bride. It was about a corporate con. The stock did not wobble. It plummeted. It lost 40% of its value in a single day of trading. The banks, led by Northern Trust and Apex, didn't just freeze the existing lines of credit. They called in the loans, partners and suppliers, smelling blood and insolvency, pulled out of long-term projects, demanding cash up front. The board, now led by the iron-willed Arthur Wellington, had no choice. In a packed, humiliating press conference, Arthur announced the permanent resignation of both Gregory and Elaine Montclair from all executive and board positions. In exchange for their cooperation and their immediate resignation, the board had agreed to limit the company's own legal pursuit of them, though they were still targets of a federal investigation. The empire they had spent a lifetime building, the one they had tried to protect from me, was stripped from their hands, not by a hostile takeover, but by a simple vote, born from their own arrogance. An interim CEO, a no-nonsense restructuring specialist from Apex Capital, was placed in charge. The Montclair reign was over. I read all of this not from my sofa, but from my office at Lumengrid, where we were in the process of negotiating a new and much larger contract with the now stabilized Apex portfolio. I had not heard from Oliver, not a single text, not a call. It was as if he, too, had evaporated with his family's name. Until 1 week later, a text appeared from a number I didn't recognize. Elena, it's me. I am at the ferry terminal, the little coffee shop. Please, I need to see you. One last time. I leave tonight. A part of me wanted to delete it, to just not, but my algorithm, my process, had one last data point to collect. I needed to close the loop. I found him in a back booth. The man in the boardroom, the man at the estate, was gone. This person was a ghost. He was wearing an old, rumpled sweatshirt. His eyes were red and raw from days of what looked like no sleep, and his face was covered in a rough, patchy beard. He looked broken. He stood up when he saw me, a reflexive, gentlemanly gesture that seemed like a relic from another life. "Thank you for coming," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I sat opposite him, but I did not take off my coat. He stared into his coffee cup. I read about the audit. I read all of it. The shell companies, the foundation, my whole life. My whole life. I thought my father was a builder. He was just a gambler who was good at lying. He looked up at me, his eyes desperate, pleading. "I want you to know. I had no idea. Elena, I swear to God, I just thought we were rich. I didn't know we were criminals." "What do you want, Oliver?" I asked. My voice was not unkind. It was just empty of him. "I signed it," he said, pushing a crumpled piece of paper across the table. "This morning, I met with Arthur's lawyers. I've renounced it. All of it. The inheritance, the trusts, the name. I'm not a Montclair anymore. I'm just me. I have a small trust fund my grandmother set up, one my parents couldn't touch. It's not much, but it's mine. I'm leaving. I'm going to, I don't know, Portland, maybe Austin. I'm going to get a small apartment and try to get a job, a real one." He was finally the man I had thought I'd met in Chicago, the man trying to escape. But he had only found the courage to do it after the house had already burned to the ground. I'm so sorry, Elena," he said, and now the tears were welling up, spilling over. "I'm sorry for all of it, for the dinner, for my parents, for not being the man you deserved." He reached across the table, his hand shaking. Is there any chance, now that they're gone, now that it's just me? Could we even just start over?" I looked at his outstretched hand. I remembered how it felt to hold it, and I felt nothing, just a deep, profound pity. I didn't take his hand. I just looked at him, and I spoke the truth, quietly and without malice. "I believe you," I said. "I believe you're sorry, and I believe you love me, in the way you know how." His face lit with a tiny, desperate hope. "But it doesn't matter. Oliver," I said. "Love, real love. It isn't just a feeling. It's an action. It's a choice. And it cannot survive in a vacuum. Love cannot survive if every single time it's tested, every single time it needs a voice or a shield, you choose silence. You didn't just fail to protect me from them. You failed to protect us from you." The hope died in his eyes. I reached into my own bag. I pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. I placed it on the table, on top of his crumpled legal document. He looked at it, confused. What is this?" "It's a copy," I said, "of the contract I gave you, the mirror, the one you couldn't sign." He flinched, as if it was hot. "I want you to have it," I said. "I want you to read it, because I need you to understand. This was never about the money. Oliver, you thought I was fighting for a piece of your empire. I was fighting for this. This was a picture of a partnership. This was a picture of equality. This," I said, tapping the paper, "was the image of the man I needed you to be, and you chose not to be him." He finally, really, looked at the document. He unfolded it, and he began to read the clauses, the ones about mutual respect, the one about valuing the work of a partner, the one about dignity. And he began to cry, not the soft, pleading tears from before, but the hard, racking, agonizing sobs of a man who was, for the first time, seeing the full, unadulterated size of what he had lost. "I read about you," he choked out, his face in his hands. I read everything. Nova Root, the 100 million. I read what you built, from nothing. And I was bringing you to my family. And I had nothing. I had nothing but their name. I understand now. My God, I understand. You were never the one being tested. I was, and I failed. I failed." He was right. He finally understood. The one thing that was missing from his life was never money. It was courage. I stood up. I put my coat back on. I looked down at the man who was now just a shell, sobbing over a contract he could never have understood. "You're not a bad man, Oliver," I said, and my voice was soft. You're just weak. And that weakness, it didn't just destroy our love. It destroyed the very empire you were trying so hard to inherit." I left him there. I walked out of the coffee shop, away from the smell of stale coffee and profound regret. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The Seattle sky was a familiar, pearly gray, and a soft, misty rain was beginning to fall. It felt clean. I pulled my collar up, and as I did, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an email, not from a lawyer, not from a bank. It was from Arthur Wellington. "Elena," the message read, "as you know, I am now chairing a new private equity fund focused on corporate transparency and ethical governance. We are building our advisory board. I can think of no one with a more relevant, practical, and hard-won expertise in the subject than you. Would you be interested in joining us?" I stared at the email. A smile, the first one in weeks, didn't form on my lips. It was too soon for that. But I felt a lightness, a deep, profound, and steady inhalation. I looked up at the gray sky. There was no empire to fight. There was no family to impress. There was no test to pass. There was just my life, wide open, stretching out in front of me. A future that needed no justification, no defense. A future that was, finally, and completely, my own. I put my phone away. I walked toward the ferry terminal, not to catch a boat, but to catch the train. I melted into the afternoon crowd, just another person, in a gray coat, in a gray city. I was just another anonymous face, but I was carrying something that Gregory, and Elaine, and Oliver Montclair, with all their billions and all their bloodlines, had never once, in their entire lives, possessed. The freedom to choose myself before I ever chose anyone else. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know your thoughts. So please comment and let me know where you're listening from. Let's chat and share our experiences. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.